Hi everyone. So I've decided to record the lesson because of the power cuts we all experience these days. Even if I have power here, sometimes you may not have power in your area. So I decided to do this. Alright, we have been discussing Interpreter of Maladies by Chumpalahiri, and then we could not finish the short story. And I think you can remember we are in this place, right? So this is a place we stopped the other day. And here we find how Mrs. Das revealed a dirty little secret to Mr. Capacci. And then he seems to be offended by selecting him to reveal that secret. Okay. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Das. But why have you told me this information? Mr. Capacci asked when she had finally finished speaking and had turned to face him once again. Right. So that is a question that came into his mind. Why have you told me this information? When she revealed how this happened and then how they got married and how she was fed up with life, how frustrated she was within her marriage, indifference of her husband, how she was burdened with household work. And after that, we find how Raj invited one of his friends to stay with them for 1 week. And then that friend took advantage of the position of Mrs. Das. But of course, she didn't object also. And soon afterwards, he left them. And her husband never knew that she misbehaved. And after that, the child was conceived. And now that person was married to somebody else living in England. And then still they keep contact with each other. Right. So I beg your pardon, Mrs. Das. Why have you told me this information? Mr. Capacci asked when she had finally finished speaking. Finally finished speaking, and we can see that she could not stop when she started. Perhaps she was seeking someone to let out what was bottled up inside the mind and had turned to face him once again. For God's sake, stop calling me Mrs. Das. I'm 28. You probably have children my age. Okay, so you can mark this 28. And also look at this. You probably have children my age. So plainly telling him that she considers Mr. Capacci as a parent, as an adult, not as an equal. But we know Mr. Capacci started to have romantic dreams about Mrs. Das. So that was evident from the last part we did. And then how he interpreted or rather misinterpreted her behavior towards him. She was not interested in her family and she didn't behave in a romantic way towards her husband either. But she suddenly showed an interest in him and in what he does. So he tends to misinterpret her behavior and then have romantic dreams about them. So this is like a bucket of cold water thrown upon him to bring him back to reality. You probably have children my age. And of course, we know that he is a middle aged person. But when Mrs. Das started to show an interest in him, he became conscious of his appearance. And then he was worried about his suit and the smell of his perspiration and all these things. Not quite. It disturbed Mr. Capacity to learn that she thought of him as a parent. You can mark this as well. And this is not something he expected actually from her. The feeling he had had towards her that had made him check his reflection in the rear view mirror as they drove evaporated a little. Evaporated, that is, vanished a little. So there we can see how he sobered a little bit. And earlier he was almost like drunk with the infatuation he had towards Mrs. Das. But now this is like coming back to reality. So you can even write, he became sobered a little. Sobering means, coming back to reality. I told you because of your talents. She put the packet of puffed rice back into her bag without folding over the top and marked this as well. And also talents. And she told him that she selected him as a person to reveal her secret because of his talents. And after that, she replaced that puffed rice in her bag, but without folding over the top. So you can even write there that she is somewhat careless, not really mindful. You can write they are not mindful or careless. I don't understand, Mr. Kapasi said. Don't you see? For 8 years, I haven't been able to express this to anybody, not to friends, certainly not to Raj. He doesn't even suspect it. He thinks I'm still in love with him. Well, don't you have anything to say? And here we find how her psychology works, how her mind works. And this secret is bottled up in her mind, and this seems to have distorted her behavior. And then she is mentally suffering. So in Mrs. Das, we find a suffering individual, not really physically suffering, but then mentally suffering. A person with internal conflict, conflict inside her mind because she is unable to share her secret with another person. So for 8 years, she had been holding that secret. So not being able to tell that to anyone because there may not have been a real, a confident person to reveal her secret, and then not to friends. And of course, we earlier learned that she did not have many friends. Friends no longer associate with because she could not keep her friendship with them. She did not go out when she was invited into their things. She was unable to participate. because she's always tied up with domestic duties, and then certainly not to Raj. And of course, we found that she did not have a social life. She was confined to her home, and the husband was the only close person to her, and she cannot reveal something of this nature to her husband. He doesn't even suspect it. He thinks I'm still in love with him. So you can mark this as well. And we find in this story characters misunderstanding others, misinterpreting others. And the husband too misunderstands her. He thinks that she is still in love with him, whereas, of course, it is obvious that she has fallen out of love. She has fallen out of love with him and then fallen out of love with life as well. Well, don't you have anything to say? So, it's difficult to say anything, right? So, there is a lack of communication once again. He could not, Mr. Kabasi could not find something suitable to say to Mrs. Das about what? About what I've just told you. Perhaps, he may have had a cultural shock, and this secret, which involves her adultery, misbehaving with another person, about what I've just told you, about my secret, and about how terrible it makes me feel. Right, secret. So you can mark these things, underline secret, how terrible it makes me feel. And we know if there is a secret in the mind, that burdens the mind, and that is like a dead weight upon the mind of a person. So Mrs. Das says that this makes her feel quite terrible, very bad. I feel terrible looking at my children and at Raj, always terrible. And you can see how she repeatedly used the word terrible, terrible, terrible. Right? She used the word one, two, three, four times. So I think that alone is enough to understand uh, how her mind works and the mental pain she feels. Right? Feel terrible, perhaps guilty, not being able to say her secret, reveal this. At Raj, always terrible. I have terrible urges, Mr. Kapasi, to throw things away. One day I had the urge to throw everything I own out of the window. The television, the children, everything. Don't you think it's unhealthy? So once again, this reflects our mind and, a psychological condition she has at that time. Right, feeling like that she's fed up with everything and then feeling terrible all the time, and then like tired of everything and feeling like throwing all the things she has. So that is actually something unhealthy, right? So that is an untreated psychological condition. He was silent. Mr. Kapasi, don't you have anything to say? I thought that was your job. So it was difficult to say anything. He was silent, right? Because he did not have anything to say. He did not know what to say and how to say anything. I thought that was your job. My job is to give to us, Mrs. Das, not that your other job as an interpreter. But we do not face a language barrier. What need is there for an interpreter? That's not what I mean. I would never have told you otherwise. So now we know why she has selected Mr. Kapasi as a person to reveal her dirty little secret. I would never have told you otherwise because of his job as an interpreter. That's now we know that that's why she has taken a sudden interest in Mr. Kapasi. It's not because that she is romantically interested in him, but because of his job and because she thought that he would be able to give her a certain remedy, solution to her psychological condition. Don't you realize what it means for me to tell you? So it is not easy to reveal something that is disadvantageous for you, right? So yeah, like something that is not flattering, something really bad about you. So it is not easy to reveal something of that nature. What does it mean? It means that I'm tired of feeling so terrible all the time. So once again, she has used the same word, terrible. Right, feeling so terrible all the time, 8 years, Mr. Kapasi. I've been in pain 8 years. I was hoping you could help me feel better. Right, you can mark this as well. I was hoping you could help me feel better. Say the right thing. Suggest some kind of remedy. So you can underline this. That was an expectation. Right, Mr. Kapasi would help her to feel better and he would say the right thing. And then he would even suggest some kind of remedy because he accurately interpreted the maladies, that is diseases of some patients. And this too is a kind of a disease in a psychological condition. So she was hoping that he would be able to suggest a kind of remedy. But anyway, Mr. Kapasi's duty at the doctor's dispensary was to accurately translate what the patients told him. So when they told him the symptoms, he translated them for the benefit of the doctor. And the doctor was a person who understands these symptoms, and then he was the person who wrote some remedies, medicine, right? But she thought that he would be able to suggest a kind of remedy, not only interpreting, right, but suggesting a kind of solution. So that made him to have a good look at Mrs. Das. He looked at her. So through Mr. Kapasi's eyes, once again we are having a good look at Mrs. Das. This time, the way he looks at Mrs. Das is somewhat different from the way he looked at earlier. Because now he understands something he didn't know about Mrs. Das earlier. Right. So let's look at the way Mrs. Das appeared to him right now. In a red plaid skirt and strawberry t-shirt, a woman not yet 30, who loved neither her husband nor her children, who had already fallen out of love with life. Right. And now he sees Mrs. Das as, as a woman, a young woman. And we know that she is only 28. And then she did not love anyone. And then she could not love her life also, fallen out of love with life. And she had fallen out of love with the husband, fallen out of love with the children, and fallen out of love with her life, her existence. Right. Her confession depressed him. Depressed him all the more when he thought of Mr. Das at the top of the path, Tina clinging to his shoulders, taking pictures of ancient monastic cells cut into the hills to show his students in America, unsuspecting and unaware that one of his sons was not his own. So the husband is a kind of a betrayed husband. Husband did not know, never guessed about the betrayal of his wife. And of course, we know that that was not pre-planned. It was not an affair. It suddenly happened. But also we know that Mrs. Das did not resist. Mr. Kapasi felt insulted that Mrs. Das should ask him to interpret a common trivial little secret. Okay, you can mark this as well. He felt insulted because Mrs. Das asked him to interpret and then mark this as well. Common, trivial, little secret. So these terms define the way he thinks about the secret. To him, it's a common, trivial, insignificant little secret. So he was offended by that. And then actually, he was not flattered by the trust she placed in him. But he felt insulted because this is a dirty secret. She did not resemble the patients in the doctor's office. Those who came glassy eyed and desperate, unable to sleep or breathe or urinate with ease, unable, above all, to give words to their pains. Still, these people are typical Indian people, and then they are simple minded people, and then they wanted to get better, so they simply told the symptoms they had. Still, Mr. Kapasi believed it was his duty to assist Mrs. Das. Perhaps he ought to tell her to confess the truth to Mr. Das. He would explain that honesty was the best policy. Honesty surely would help her feel better, as she had put it. Perhaps he would offer to preside over the discussion as a mediator. But anyway, earlier he wanted to be a mediator in the matters of conflicts between countries. But now he even thought of being a mediator in this family issue, family conflict. He decided to begin with the most obvious question. And actually, this shows the conventional mindset of Mr. Kapasi. right? It's that is honesty was a best policy, right? So this is actually the typical way one looks at a problem like this, and then telling her to confess the truth to her husband, then that would help her better. He decided to begin with the most obvious question to get to the heart of the matter. So he was behaving like a professional, going to the depth of the matter. So he asked, "Is it really pain you feel, Mrs. Das, or is it guilt?" She turned to him and glared. Glared? So we can see that this question made her angry, displeased, glaring, looking at him angrily. Perhaps maybe because of this, is it pain or guilt? And one feels guilty after doing something really bad, right? So he asked, is it actually the guilt, or are you in mental pain? Mustard oil thick on her frosty pink lips. She opened her mouth to say something, but as she glared at Mr. Capasi, that is looking angrily at Mr. Capasi, some certain knowledge seemed to pass before her eyes, and she stopped. Perhaps she was trying to contradict, to say something very sharp, but as she stopped, it crushed him. He knew at that moment that he was not even important enough to be properly insulted. So only then he realized that he was not actually quite important to her. Right? He was not considered a special person by Mrs. Das. So she didn't even oppose, she didn't even say anything, didn't even reply, right? Didn't even like contradicted or do anything like that. Just she became silent, stopped what she was trying to say. She opened the car door and began walking up the path, wobbling a little on her square wooden heels. She was not steady on her wooden heels because they are square. Reaching into a straw bag to eat handfuls of puffed rice. It fell through her fingers, so she is not mindful. And she was scattering puffed rice uh, after her, falling through her fingers, not holding them carefully. So that left a trail, zigzagging trail. And we know Mr. Capasi warned them of like giving food to monkeys. And he said that they will stay quiet until you feed them. Don't try to feed them. And then she was scattering something they can eat. So monkey noticed that. So that caused a monkey to leap down from a tree and devour the little white grains. And we know they are very hungry. In search of more, the monkey began to follow Mrs. Das. Others joined him. And we know monkeys stay together. So that she was soon being followed by about half a dozen of them, their velvety tails dragging behind. And that was something she never noticed. And she was going up the path, and then she was followed by about half a dozen monkeys, and then they were picking up the rice she scattered because she was not mindful enough. And then seeing this, Mr. Capasi stepped out of the car. He wanted to holler, to alert her in some way. But he worried that if she knew they were behind her, she would grow nervous. Because we know that they are not familiar with the Indian landscape and then Indian wildlife, even though they are Indians. Perhaps she would lose her balance. Perhaps they would pull at her bag over her hair. He began to jog up the path, taking a fallen branch in his hand to scare away the monkeys, because he knew how to scare them away. Mrs. Das continued walking oblivious, trailing grains of puffed rice, that she is not paying attention to her surrounding. Near the top of the incline, before a group of cells fronted by a row of squat stone pillars, Mr. Das was kneeling on the ground, focusing the lens of his camera. The children stood under the arcade, now hiding, now emerging from wave. So the husband and children were there and they were playing. Wait for me, Mrs. Das called out. I'm coming. Tina jumped up and down. Here comes Mummy. Great, Mr. Das said without looking up. Even though he said the word great, he didn't actually mean it. And of course, we know that he said great because uh, now he is able to get a picture of all five of them, a family photo, just in time. Okay, you can mark, underline, we will get Mr. Capacity to take a picture of the five of us. Mr. Capacity quickened his pace, waving his branch so that the monkeys scampered away, distracted in another direction. Where is Bobby? Mrs. Das asked when she stopped. Of course, Bobby was their topic now. Now she is concerned about Bobby because he was not to be seen. Mr. Das looked up from his camera. I don't know, Ronnie, where's Bobby? So he didn't pay much attention to his children, small children. So he's asking the elder child, where's a younger one? Where's your brother? Ronnie shrugged. I thought he was right here. This is a careless gesture. He was not concerned. I thought he was right here. So we can see that there is no real companionship between two brothers, even though they are similar in age. Where is he? Mrs. Das repeated sharply. What's wrong with all of you? So it's like suddenly she's aroused from her dream. What's wrong with all of you? They began calling his name, wandering up and down the path a bit. Because they were calling, they did not initially hear the boy's screams. When they found him, a little farther down the path under a tree, he was surrounded by a group of monkeys, over a dozen of them, pulling at his t-shirt with their long black fingers. So he was harassed by monkeys somewhere down the path and he was under a tree. So the boy was screaming, They were unable to hear because they too were shouting, calling. The puffed rice Mrs. Das had spilled was scattered at his feet, raked over by the monkey's hands. So it's like he is victimized by the careless actions of his mother, right? So that puffed rice was there and raked over by the monkey's hands. The boy was silent, his body frozen, swift tears running down his startled face. His bare legs were dusty and red with wells from where one of the monkeys struck him repeatedly with the stick he had given to it earlier. And of course, earlier, he was trying to hit a monkey with a stick, no? So that was grabbed by that particular monkey. And then one of the monkeys is beating him repeatedly with the same stick. Right. And we know he was the one who started it at first. Now he is beaten by the same stick. Daddy, the monkey is hurting Bobby, Tina said. Mr. Das wiped his palms on the front of his shorts. In his nervousness, he accidentally pressed the shutter on his camera. The whirring noise of the advancing film excited the monkeys. And the one with the stick began to beat Bobby more intently. So the boy was beaten more and more. What are we supposed to do? What if they start attacking? So we can see that father is completely, utterly useless in a time of a crisis. In a crisis situation like this, he is utterly useless because he does not do the right action at a moment like this. And he was nervous. He himself was nervous. He did not know what to do. And then he accidentally pressed a shutter on his camera because that was something he was handling all the time. So it came out with a noise, whirring noise. And then that excited monkeys more and more. And Bobby was beaten more. So Bobby is once again victimized by the negligence of his parents. Mr. Capassi, Mrs. Dash shrieked, noticing him standing to one side. Do something, for God's sake, do something. And then Mr. Capassi took his branch and shooed them away, hissing at the ones that remained, stomping his feet to scare them. The animals retreated slowly with a measured gait, obedient but unintimidated. That is, not scared. They are not intimidated by Mr. Capassi's actions. They are not that scared of humans. They are used to the sight of the humans. So he had to take a branch and then shout, chase them away. After that, Mr. Capassi gathered Bobby in his arms and brought him back to where his parents and siblings were standing. Siblings are sisters and brothers, sister and brother. As he carried him, he was tempted to whisper a secret into the boy's ear. But Bobby was stunned and shivering with fright, his legs bleeding slightly where the stick had broken the skin. When Mr. Capassi delivered him to his parents, Mr. Das brushed some dirt off the boy's t-shirt and put the visor on him the right way. Mrs. Das reached into her straw bag to find a bandage, which she taped over the cut on his knee. Ronnie offered his brother a fresh piece of gum. He's fine, just a little scared, right, Bobby? Mr. Das said, putting the top of, patting the top of his head. So now he's given special attention by everyone in the family. He's petted by everyone, right? Like touching, and then his brother even gave him a fresh piece of chewing gum, and then his mother attended to his bruise or cut on his knee, and father patted his head. Oh, let's get out of here, Mrs. Das said. She folded her arms across a strawberry on her chest. Now the strawberry is covered. And we know Mr. Kapasi was tempted by the sight of that strawberry on her chest. Now she folded her arms across it. Now it is not visible, it is covered. This place gives me the creeps. Yeah, back to the hotel definitely. And I think this is the second time they agreed or something, no? And the first time when Mrs. Das said that Mr. Kapas's job was interesting, he too agreed. Maybe out of politeness, but then over the family issues, this is the first time they agree. Like going back to the hotel right away. Mr. Das agreed. Right. So these Indians actually are the Indians who are not of India. They can't understand the landscape and people and culture of India. So inside the hotel room, they feel safe. And of course, the hotel room is artificial situation, not the natural environment they are dealing with. So in the hotel room, they are in their comfort zones. They don't have to worry about certain challenges coming from the environment. Poor Bobby, Mrs. Das said. Come here a second, let mommy fix your hair. Again she reached into a straw bag. This time for her hairbrush, and began to run it around the edges of the translucent visor. And she feels sorry for her child. When she whipped out the hairbrush, the slip of paper with Mr. Kapasi's address on it fluttered away in the wind. You can underline this. Once again, a very careless action, whipping out the hairbrush, and that piece of paper fluttered away in the wind, that is out of reach. She didn't notice, she didn't even notice it. No one but Mr. Kapasi noticed. He watched it as it rose, carried higher and higher by the breeze, into the trees where the monkeys now sat, solemnly observing the scene below. So that was blown away in the wind, out of reach. So with that, his dreams too was blowing away in the wind. Mr. Kapasi observed it too, knowing that this was a picture of the Das family he would preserve forever in his mind. Right, and we know that is the only link they have. Right, so without the address, Mrs. Das can't contact him. cannot send him the picture, and then he was building his dreams upon Mrs. Das's writing to him letters, and then he is replying, their relationship growing and revealing everything, dissatisfaction and all these things. Now we can see that, and all these dreams are shattered at the end of the short story. Right, so that is the end of his romantic infatuation. All right, then shall we look at couple of themes? Right, so let's look at this. So this is one of the main themes of the short story, lack of communication between characters and their consequences. So lack of communication, or lack of communication is central to the short story. And when we think about communication, we know that communication is actually the key to success or failure of relationships. And if you communicate successfully, you can understand the feelings, thoughts, ideas, intentions of another person. And then that understanding will pave the way for a better and solid or strong relationship. So therefore, so it is not wrong to say that communication is central to relationships. So if you have poor communication, that would lead to the failure of relationships. That is, you can't have a very sound or close relationship with another person. But if it is successful, and then the relationships will be stronger. This story shows how superficial or ineffective communication negatively affects relationships. And of course, superficial communication, and that was something we have noticed in the short story. And when this couple, Mr. and Mrs. Das, when they communicate over trivial matters, day-to-day matters, not about something serious. And of course, we have seen there are petty little quarrels, bickering, that small argument over very trivial issues, very small things, minor things, right? Such as who would take the daughter to the toilet today. So these things. So they are quite superficial. And the communication is not effective because this communication does not bring about real understanding of characters. So that negatively affect relationships. So very often we found like the couple accusing each other, and Mrs. Das once accused Mr. Das of hiring that car which does not have AC, so therefore it's difficult, and the shutters are broken also. And she even accused him of trying to save some stupid rupees, being stingy, right? So we can see that communication is not that effective. And then he too in turn responded with rough words. So that does not bring about a healthy understanding between people. So we find estrangement. So husband and wife are like strangers to each other. And we find later when Meena revealed the dirty little secret to Mr. Kapasi, we know that she felt that she could not reveal a secret to her husband. And the husband failed to understand her mentality, and how stressed she was due to household duties, and then not being able to enjoy her life even though she was young. So that led to their moving away from each other, and then loneliness also. So in Meena we find an isolated person, not only physically but mentally also. And physically, even though she is surrounded by a lot of people in that country, America, we can see that she does not have the moral support of her parents, and she doesn't have close friends, and she doesn't have a suitable person to confide a secret. And like that, people appear to live in their own little worlds, and then unhappiness. So Mrs. Das's unhappiness is almost tangible. We almost feel it, how unhappy she is within her marriage, and also in her like connections with others in society, and then alienation also. They feel like aliens, strangers. uh, so we find also the importance of interpretation. These two can be linked to communication, because interpretation too is a kind of communication. As an example, Meena and Mr. Kapasi misinterpret each other. Meena thinks that Mr. Kapasi is able to interpret a problem. That is to, listen to her problem. Of course, he listened to her problem and then interpret that in the right way. But we know that Mr. Kapasi is a person uh, whose mind is shaped by traditional Indian culture. So he was more or less shocked by that secret of Meena. And then she was expecting that he would be able to offer a solution, a remedy, do something about it, suggest something. And then Mr. Kapasi thinks that she's interested in him romantically. And there too we find, how they understood each other. They understood uh, and interpreted each other in a different way, not the right way. So they have their own ideas about the other person, and he thinks that she's interested in him, but in a romantic manner. But she's later it is revealed to him that she's not really interested in him in that way, because she clearly pointed out that I'm 28, you probably have children my age. That brings him back to reality, to real world, right? So these misunderstandings occur when there is miscommunication, when communication is not effective. Okay, right? Shall we move on? Culture clash or cultural differences. So when we look at the story, we know that this is a story of mainly about Indian Americans, Indian American family. And Indian Americans are caught between two cultures, and they are exposed to two cultures. One culture at home and another culture when they go out into society. Mrs. Das, on one hand, is confined to a house like a typical Indian wife. Right, when we look at Meena Das, we can see that she is like a combination of both features of Eastern culture and Western culture, but she is mainly influenced by Western culture, because we know that they were born and they were raised in America, and they are second generation immigrants. And but when we think about a marriage and the life afterwards, and of course a marriage, she thinks that it's more or less a setup, like parents, both of them, both their parents are like Indian Americans, and they are family friends, and they allowed this union to take place, like joking about they are marrying each other, and they provided ample opportunities for these children to be together. So the consequence is that, and they were in love, and they thought that it was love, right? It was actually could have been teenage love, and the parents, it appears like, did not give them enough time to grow up and see the world, and after that get married. So in her world there was no one else other than Raj, and so they went to the same school, same high school, and they also, she didn't have friends because she didn't have many friends because she was spending time with Raj, and then at home also. And it's like, parents were like putting them together, so they married when they were very young, and after that baby started to come, and then she was not supported by her parents, because we find that they went back to India, and then she was alone there, and she had to handle everything, looking after her small kids, and then not enjoying her life, not even getting the chance to go out with the friends, right? So she was confined, she was domesticated like a typical Indian wife. And we know typical Indian wives do not have a life away from their home. And of course, we know that they love their family, they love their children, right? And they are always selfless, and they do not consider themselves as important in the family. They are uh, like self-sacrificial. But in Mrs. Das's character, we don't find those positive features we find in a typical Indian mother. So she lacks maternal feelings. Maybe because she was psychologically affected, we don't know. Uh, but we know that she is not that concerned about her children, and she didn't show understanding also, and she failed to understand her daughter also. Her daughter wanted to get her nails polished, but then she didn't listen to it. And then like a typical Indian wife, she didn't have that much loyalty, and that was the first opportunity provided for her, and then she did not resist, and then she let that thing happen to her. And consideration also cannot be seen in Mrs. Das's character. And then love for her family, of course we know that she's a self-absorbed person, and when she buys something she eats alone, not even putting up a show to offer something to her children, right? So she appears as a selfish character, self-absorbed, indifferent to her children, indifferent to her husband, right? Neglecting them, and concerned about her appearance, her comfort, her likes. Okay, so there she differs from being a typical Indian mother and typical Indian wife. So they are Indians. So it is obvious from the story that though they are Indians, they are Indian Americans, but not of India. Right? So we can't say that they are typical Indians because they fail to understand Indians. Right? They can't understand the landscape of India. And Mr. Das also cannot understand the real plight of poor Indians. So they are aliens, they are strangers to Indian environment. Now that's why they had certain issues. Bobby was beaten by the monkeys, and Mrs. Das was spilling puffed rice behind her, provoking the monkeys. And then they can't understand Indian culture too. And look at the way they are dressed. And also, we find that they are not that interested in ancient Indian culture and can't understand the language. They are not dressed like Indians, and even they are greeting also. And Mr. Kapasi greeted Mr. Das in the Eastern way, and then he returned it with the handshake. So they find it difficult to understand India, and we find that children had not seen monkeys outside a zoo, and then the child, yes, Ronnie cannot understand that goats do not eat gum, and he wanted to give a piece of gum to the goat. And Mr. Kapasi, it was something Mr. Kapasi continues to notice, that they are different though they are Indians. Uh, okay, then shall we move on? So we'll quickly look at these themes and issues. Also in the short story, we find the danger of romanticism. And we found how Mr. Kapasi misinterpreted Mrs. Das's behavior, and he allowed himself to be carried away by romantic dreams about their relationship, and he was thinking about their continuation of their correspondence, revealing their dissatisfactions. So I'm compelled to stop this because I think there's going to be a power cut. So we will take up the rest the next day. Okay.